Please join me in welcoming our panel. It's a great crew. We've done similar topics in New York and LA, and I think we have a lot of great questions to discuss. But one of the things I want to talk about in particular is going to be around this dichotomy between what can and what do smaller companies do in and around engagement, and how does that differ as these companies scale? But before we get into this, I want to do a couple housekeeping items. One, we're going to do formal Q&A at the end of the session, so please hold your questions. Remember your questions. Hold your questions until the end. The second is, you can probably see behind us, we're filming the event, so we're going to make the event available. Hello to everybody watching from home. We're going to make this event available. You'll all receive email reminders. You'll notice, I see a number of you holding the cards, but you have surveys. These are incredibly important to us. We think a lot about how we host these events, and we always want to make them better. So please make sure to fill them out. The other thing is, we turn off the lights when the moderator isn't doing a good job around 7 o'clock. So around 7 o'clock, the lights will go out. If the moderator is not doing a good job, I am the moderator, so just don't be alarmed. So we'll signal to me to keep it on, but no, in all seriousness, they're on a timer, so we'll turn it back on. Don't be alarmed, the lights go out. The final piece is this is a shameless plug. There's a number of people out in the audience today who are looking for jobs. Can Brandon stand up? Brandon's not looking for a job. He's our Director of Employee Success. Brandon is shy, not in the room today, but we are recruiting for a senior technical recruiter. So if you guys know of anybody, we would love to know, because we're trying to recruit so we can recruit. So please pass along your candidates. So to begin, I want to, first of all, thank my panel for coming. And I'd love for you each to introduce yourselves, talk a little bit about your company, and maybe talk a bit about how you see and how you define engagement. Did you want to start?
Darren, one housekeeping item. There's a 2-glass minimum, so if you haven't had your required 2 glasses of wine, please back at the bar.
If I could have a UFB team member bring me a beer, I'd appreciate that. David, I'm looking at you. Quit smiling, I'm not kidding here.
Beer's not going to bring itself. Hi, I'm David Kingsley with Salesforce. I lead our strategy and operations practice in HR, what we call employee success. The definition of engagement for us, just at a very high level, is culture in practice. And by that, I mean culture plus technology equals engagement. And without the technology part, culture is a great slogan on our JP Morgan Chase t-shirts that we all wear, once a year when we trot around that 3-mile course. But with the technology, that's where it really comes to life, where it becomes in practice. And so we think of engagement as culture plus technology.
Excellent, thank you.
Hi, I'm Dawn Sharafin. I lead people ops at Slack. That's right, Lynn, right there. I call engagement making my team come and cheer for me. For me, I think, so before I was at Slack, I had a job where I was Director of Employee Engagement, and I would say it probably took me 6 months to figure out what the hell that job was. And so, sorry for everyone that worked with me previously. But I think it's really important to define what engagement is not. Engagement is not happiness. Engagement is not perks. Engagement, for me, that's, I get frustrated when people conflate those words. For me, engagement is increasing people's discretionary effort that they're spending at their job because they're passionate and excited about what they're doing. So that's what engagement means to me.
Hi everyone, I'm Natasha Kahimkar. I'm VP People at Guardant Health. We're based in Redwood City. Engagement for me is about the motivation and commitment that people demonstrate to the organization that they're with, but I see it on multiple levels. So there's engagement in your own world, in the role you're in. There's engagement in your cohort, the people that you work with most closely. It could be your team, but it could also be colleagues in other departments. And then engagement with the organization as a whole. So I see engagement as kind of infiltrating various levels of an organization. So that's how I approach it.
Hey guys, I'm Maya. I'm the VP of Strategy and People at Greenhouse. And first of all, I think this is the hardest question that we're going to answer tonight, and then it's even harder to be the fourth one to answer it. But if I had to say something different, I think it's a really hard thing to define. I don't think it's one sentence. I think it's actually the presence of a lot of things. And how I think about it is, engagement to me is employees being able to work on what they want to be working on, where they want to be working on it, with who they want to be working on it with. And when you don't have one of those, when people aren't engaged with their coworkers, or they really aren't into the projects that they're working on, they don't see the career path in this company, I think you don't have it. So rather than defining like what it is, I think you need all those things, and if you don't have one of them, then I know our employees aren't engaged.
So, Mila, let me pick on you a little bit. We'll start down there. So
I'm ready.
We're not at the difficult part of this either yet. So you represent. So you work at the smallest of the organizations on the panel today. So you're just reaching a scale where you're beginning to measure and think about engagement. How have you started to think about programs either that you're currently or wanting to roll out to boost and promote engagement?
Yeah, we were actually talking about this right before the panel. So Greenhouse started, we were 45, 50 people at the beginning of last year. We ended the year at 200 employees. So a lot of stuff changed. And I think that last year, I would say, we really had a really good sense of engagement just because we could talk to people. Like we'd sit in our executive meetings and say like, hey, what's going on? And each person would come in with a perspective. And from that conversation, we were like, okay, we have a pretty decent pulse on what's happening because we have a really good communication with people. And then this thing happened at 150 employees, and someone had said this to me before, but does anyone know what Dunbar's number is? Yeah, right, like how many meaningful connections you can have, and you can have 150 of them. And someone was like, oh, you'll see, when your company hits that, it'll change. And I was like, it can't be that exact. But like literally the week after 170, we were sitting in our executive team meeting. I was like, hey guys, like what's going on at the company? And everyone was like, well, I heard this, but like I don't know for sure. And something changed, right? And so we got to the point when we couldn't just talk to people about what's going on. We felt like we had to measure it. And I guess we're gonna start with the thank you culture amp, right? So we started measuring it recently, and I think it's really important to understand what the drivers are for engagement at your company and what keeps people engaged. And at some point that can be a very organic thing. Like I think we've always been very good at transparent communication, and that was something that kept people engaged in our company. We didn't have to really deliberately do anything about that at 50 people. We could just be deliberately transparent, or we could just be transparent. Now that we're bigger, it's a lot more thinking around it. Like, how do we keep doing that? So I'd say like that's one of the programs we're doing that's had to shift as we grew, is take the things that we know are important to people's engagement and do them in a more deliberate way that still feels authentic, but is still accomplishing the same goals.
And Natasha, how has this affected your organization? So we defined it, we know a bit more about what engagement is. What kind of programs have you rolled out?
So I think we actually may be the smallest on the panel. So we're 140 people.
We're neck and neck here.
Okay, so here we go. So we're 140 people. We have a very strong mission, and that is a big driver for why people are at our company. We're in the cancer diagnostics space, and so we use a blood test to help stage 3 and stage 4 cancer patients determine, they're oncologists rather, determine the genetic mutations that are making up the solid tumor. So rather than do a tissue biopsy, we do a blood test. So it changes the nature of cancer, and it allows us to put patients on a path towards making cancer a manageable disease. So we're already starting with a very mission-driven organization and a very strong, powerful mission. People join our company for one of two reasons. They're in love with the science, or they have a personal vendetta against cancer like I do. And then when we get there, we fall in love with the other side. So for us, engagement has to go beyond that. It has to go beyond what our vision and our mission and our values are all about. And so early on, so I joined, I was 101. When I joined, I started to think about engagement and figure out how this organization, as it grows and blossoms, how do we start to talk about engagement and how do we make it matter in regular day-to-day dialogue? And we're led by scientists. And we have a lot of people with deep scientific backgrounds, lots of PhDs, and data matters. And data matters to me too. And so some organizations make a decision not to measure engagement until later on. I did it as soon as I could. So we started last fall. And it begins that conversation. So the programs that start are, you start to talk about engagement, you measure engagement, you talk about the results, and you do it really quickly. We did it within a week. We had our all hands and we shared the results. Then you talk about it more deeply in functions, with managers. Already the conversation becomes part of the fabric of the organization. And then it gets embedded into things like a manager's goals, or it gets built into what we do at our all hands, how we do our all hands. What have we changed immediately based on feedback from an engagement survey? And so the way I think about engagement is less about programs and initiatives, but as a strategy. What are the levers that I want to pull on? Sometimes I may pull on some levers more strongly than others. But the intent is never to make it programmatic or initiative-based, but always have it be focused on key elements that mattered from the beginning that I may just weigh differently as time progresses.
Thank you. Dawn, I'm interested in your perspective. So you're seeing massive amounts of growth, right? And every time you bring on new cohorts of employees, you have to think about how do I bring them onto the culture. How do you think about measuring and managing and driving engagement when you have such explosive employee growth?
Yeah, so that's exactly what I was going to start talking about, was like, let's have some real talk when you are growing like massively at a hyper growth and you're just trying to figure out how to keep the wheels on the train, on the bus, and not go off the road, right? So I think the way we do it, I agree with Natasha, it's not necessarily a program or it's not necessarily a process. At Slack, we have these values that I used to like kind of roll my eyes every time someone said values. It is truly the only place I've ever worked that it didn't feel like bullshit marketing speak in a lunchroom wall. Our values actually mean and resonate and live through our culture. And so when we are experiencing all this hyper growth, we look at, as we're building all of this stuff, because we're only a 2-year-old company, right? I joined in August, we were 200 people, we're about 450 now. So like it's a little cray. And so as we're building these programs in the first time, like when we build as we build a reward system, as we bring a compensation system, as we build feedback, how do we do that from a perspective that is true to our values, that feels special, that's a little magic, that's unique to our company, whether it's, what did you say, like a conquering cancer or a vendetta against cancer? Whether it's a vendetta against cancer or making someone's work life more pleasant, productive, or simple. It really is about leading with empathy, leading with courtesy. Those are some of our values. And then we build that into everything that we do. So then it feels like the DNA of the company is authentic as we grow up. And I think that's what most of our employees say they come for, is we're pretty public with our values. We hear it a lot in the interview process. That's why people want to come here. We have a pretty, I kind of find a better word, but a cult-like CEO. Like, he is the person you will follow into a jungle. They come for him. They come for our diversity approach and initiatives. And so for us, that's what we know bring people in the door. And so as we build each of our programs, because we're just building them right now, it's how do we make sure that we honor that and make sure that that keeps going forward.
Now, David, you're viewing this the question of engagement from a very different perspective. And I'm interested in a couple things. One is seeing global scale. How does that change the way you think about engagement and engagement programs? And then I also want you to dig back into what you said in the opening statement, is marrying technology with engagement, and then how that enables, again, the global scale of your programs.
I have the privilege to work pretty directly with our co-founder, Parker Harris. And when he and Mark were founding the company here in San Francisco 16 years ago, a little apartment on Telegraph Hill, I said to him, did you ever think it was going to be this big? And he looked at me and just said, I had an idea that we were doing something really special, and we were focused on that. It wasn't about how big we were going to grow. And so we just ticked over 20,000 people. Globally, we'll be about 45,000 people by 2020. And a common conversation that happens in our halls and in our HR shop is around how do we preserve culture at scale? How do we maintain that specialness of what we are, that usness? And so we call our culture the Aloha culture, and it's about how we treat each other and how we behave. And one of the primary ways we've done that is the transparency of how our people interact with each other. And at Salesforce, we use our own technology. We call it drinking your own champagne. I got there and said, eat our own dog food, and like the room went quiet. They're like, we don't say that. So we drink our own champagne, and radical transparency on chatter, to the point where when I came into the HR organization, I looked at my colleague and I said, we let them say that? So we let them pretty much say anything, unless it's one of those things you really have to intervene. And so we not only permit it, but we encourage it. We want people to be really free to speak their minds, to challenge the status quo, to ask questions, and to put hard questions to the leaders. And it's interesting to watch when a leader comes into Salesforce who's not been in that kind of an environment, and they push back on it, the culture sort of educates them. It doesn't reject them, it just educates them and says, this is how we build engagement here through this transparency. And so that's been a real hallmark. And anytime something gets in the way of that, we kind of kick that brick out of the way because we want that transparent culture to be maintained. One of my favorite examples, we have a group on our Chatter product called Airing of Grievances. And so anybody who knows Seinfeld, this is literally a place where you can go and post things that just piss you off in the office. And so someone spills Cheerios, someone's going to take a picture of it and post it up there and say, clean up your mess. Or they'll say, I can't get into this app today and it's been down twice in the last 2 weeks. Can someone look into this? And our HR organization actually trolls airing of grievances, and we create tickets that we action out of that. And our employees know that's a forum that they can get attention to the things that they want addressed. And so it's a very startup-y type small culture feel when everybody just gets to kick the can around on a chatter group, but it makes a global company feel very small and maintain that intimacy that we think is a special sauce of our culture.
But it sounds to me like part of the magic of that is the closed loop behind, I'm not just speaking into a vacuum. I can say something and something's actually going to happen. Right, so it's not just a matter of me complaining about something, but somebody's hearing on the other side.
Yeah, and if there's not something that happens, I get an email from my boss and say, I saw this on Airing of Grievances, what are you doing about it? So people take it very, very seriously.
So Dawn, you're not quite 20,000 yet, but you might be
Next
2 months
month.
away.
Yeah, 2 months. 2 months.
So I'm interested in your perspective here on this issue of scaling. And this is, we've had a number of these conversations here, and the programs that you can run when you're 10 people, you're bringing your dog to work, are not the same that you can run at 100 or 1,000 or 10,000. So you're probably starting to see some of that scale right now. How has that affected your thinking about the engagement programs that you want to roll out? Particularly as you think about, well, am I going to roll out a program that a year from now for 1,000 people or 2,000 people, am I going to be able to support it?
Yes, I think that's a question we ask ourselves every single day, and are we building for scale, right? We think Slack is inevitable. We hope to be 20,000 if we're so lucky one day. But how do we do it so we're not reinventing something every 6 months? And so for us, when I first came in, they used the word operationalize a lot, and I was like, no, about the word operationalize. But it really became a word that, for me, I took it away from being administrative and more to like building the foundation of what we're doing. So I relate a lot with the airing of grievances, and we have a lot of Slack channels that people post spilled Cheerios or whatever. And I think that the programs that we build have to be true to that transparency. That's number one, and it has to be you have to get feedback. Right? So if they're screaming into the void, it doesn't matter what you're doing. So we're looking and we're investing early, so that's everything from our tools and systems. So we also use Culture Amp. We're looking at feedback tools like Enjoya that has natural language processing, so we can be looking for bias, constructivity. We're looking at building a HRIS system that doesn't suck. We're not building that. We're looking at investing in one that doesn't suck. And so I think it's really building early so that we're setting the foundation, a really nice, strong foundation for, then you can swap things out. If you have that strong foundation, then you can swap out some of the different things that make sense when you're at 500 to 1,000. You're kind of anchored with the right systems, with the right tools, and investing early, and making sure that you're building the culture that when someone is screaming into the void or giving you feedback, you're responding to that. Because the second that you don't anymore, and you go from that 50 to 100 and 500, that's when your culture breaks, right? We used to know what was going on. I used to be heard. I used to matter, right?
And I do want to come back to that theme in a second of closed loop and whether it's Chatter or Slack or an employee survey to make sure that we're actioning on the feedback that we're getting. So let's remind me if I don't bring that back up, because I think it's a critical part of this conversation. So Natasha, I'm curious as how you think about the role engagement programs with regard to scale, right? What is the right engagement program for an organization of 120 people look like versus what you might be in 2 years or 5 years or 10?
So I come back to, I'm not a fan of the program thing.
Yeah.
For me, it's about where you invest. And I want to invest thinking ahead. So when I think about when I joined the organization and was thinking about things like performance management, right? We had an event on this, just the last Udemy event. for me, it was a matter of making sure that we had a conversation about it, that I can go and do a lot of things in performance management. It's easy. We've done it in our sleep, right? All of us. But it is thinking proactively about what we want the shape of the organization to be. So I engaged the senior management team in a conversation about, do you want ratings? I don't care. I'm not bringing a personal bias to this conversation that I'm going to introduce at this moment. I have one, but I'm not introducing it right now. And so when I think about engagement, it gets to that level, right? So it becomes part of the way we operate and the way we think about managing performance, the way we think about coaching people, the way we think about enriching people's roles and developing people so that they can grow with the organization or grow out and come back, because I love boomerangs. But thinking about those things in that way makes it, for me, a long-term investment. What I haven't done is think about okay, what can I do this year, what can I do this year, what can I do this year? And I think that is the greatest danger, is to treat engagement as something you can address right away. So another way to think about engagement is the way we think about development planning, right? You think about development planning, you're building habits. Habits take time. It's often 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Development goals, 18 months, 2 years in practice to build that habit very strongly. I think of engagement in the same way. So I think about, where am I investing? How am I growing the organization? How can I help the organization's people grow with it? And so for me, I've been investing in performance management, not a tool, but the skill. So my colleagues and I spent a ton of time there we go.
Yep.
See?
Shimkus is not, oh, there we go. Thank you guys.
See?
I appreciate it.
Didn't like it. But we spent our time making sure that we were able to have managers who were empowered and able to have the right conversations with their people. And we have that same investment in education for our colleagues. We call our employees colleagues. For our colleagues, so that the dialogue in performance management is what really matters. I don't care what tool or system we're using, or at least I didn't this year. Next year, yes. But not this year. So that's where I'm investing. So that's how I think about it when I think about engagement. And in fact, our engagement survey that we ran last fall spoke to communication. It spoke to what people needed from their managers. They're not asking about, I don't know, can we have more parties? They're not asking about, can we have free food on Friday too? Those things are table stakes. They're like medical and dental. You should have them.
What are they asking for instead?
They're asking for more connection to where the company's going. So the people who started with the organization in the early days, now there are more people in the organization, right? There's a little bit more structure. And it's not as easy as going to a convention, coming back, and just people getting around the coffee machine in the kitchen talking about how it went. Now we have a huddle meeting. So we come back, we want fresh, hot off the press impression. So we have to structure things differently. So people need to still feel that connection. We just have to get more creative in how we ensure it happens.
So Maya, I want to touch on the theme and then come back to something you said a second ago around just passing 150 people. And something sociologically changes there. And that's sort of causing you to think about, okay, at this point I need to start measuring. How are you thinking about not just building the measuring program, but also building responsiveness into the org, whether it's within HR employee and success or culturally across the rest of the management team? How do you make sure that you're building the not just the asking the questions and assessing, but also the action on the other side?
Yeah, well, you kind of fail if you only do the first part, right? Like, you need to react to it.
But so many people only do the first part. And we hear that over and over again. Maybe not in this crew, but in a lot of companies,
yeah.
You ask, but then you don't act.
Well, the second part's scarier. Like, I got up in front of our whole company in December, and our scores were really good, our first, quarterly engagement around, so I got up there, and it was really easy. I was like, hey guys, I am so excited to tell you that 99% of people are proud to work at Greenhouse, and 98% of people think their manager really cares about them, and that was the easiest slide. But then it felt very important to also say, and here's the stuff we're not that good at. And I remember, I don't really get nervous public speaking. I just was standing up there and I just froze and I just looked at everyone. I was like, I'm really nervous to go to the next slide. Like, it's shocking how hard it is to talk about the stuff that we're not doing well. And I wasn't gonna say this, but I will anyway. One of the girls on my team told me that some people like think I'm kind of robotic and not that human, which made me very sad to hear. But she said that when I said that, like, it made it much more human to be like, yeah, it is really hard to talk about it, but we have to talk about it. And I think that was, like, for me as a leader, a really good turning point. That was like, you can't just get up there and talk about all the good stuff and, like, be robotic. You have to admit where stuff isn't going well. And I think that's one piece that we've really embraced. I mean, kind of always, like, honest communication and authenticity has always been a big value of ours. But talking about what's not going well, having conversations around it. And one thing we've really done is, I was really, like, the things that aren't good are really hard to fix on the people level. Even as an executive team, like, you can't just fix it. And so one approach we've taken has been to get the whole org involved in it and go to everyone and say, look, we all want the same thing. Like, we all want a really great place to work. We all want a place where we can all be engaged. So either we can, like, take these problems and, like, go sit in a room and figure them out, or we can just actually get together, and whoever wants to solve them, like, let's solve them together. And I think that was a really good thing for us because it takes the burden off of the people team or the executive team or the managers, and it brings everyone into the conversation. And that for me has been the biggest shift. So now that's what we do. So, I kind of get up there and say, these are the things that we're working on. Like, we're going to make a couple subcommittees, and for this quarter, here's the 3 things we're going to focus on. If you care about these things, like, let's go have a conversation about it. And we found that to be really, really powerful. It's very honest, it's very collaborative, and it's a lot easier than having to take it all on yourself.
Can I just add to one thing? So I agree with everything that you said. And I want to say that sometimes you can just fix it, right? And I think it depends on the situation, but I think that that's one thing that we should be empowered as we're coaching our leaders is some stuff is really low-hanging fruit. So just fix it, right? I mean, I'm really impressed with Salesforce. They looked at pay equity, they fixed it, right? So there are things that you can do to just fix it, and sometimes just fix it, and that will help employee engagement, right?
True, very true.
Does that come from the top down? So I'm curious.
It has to. It has to.
Even at the scale of 20,000, how do you decide what to fix? I mean, I can't imagine what your airing of the grievances thread looks like.
Yeah, yeah, it's long. I turned off the automatic refresh it sends me an email every time there's a post because I can't get through my email. Every year we redo our corporate strategy. And we call it our V2 MOM. It's vision, values, methods, obstacles, and measures. And at the beginning of the year, Mark sets it for the company. It's usually in January, February. And then in about 6 weeks, it cascades down through the entire company. Every single person, 20,000 people, have a V2 MOM. And that V2 MOM makes reference to your managers above you, and your managers above you makes reference to his or hers above them. And what that does, it gives a line of sight into what we're going after as a company. The obstacles is the hardest one to write because it's sort of corporate permission to whine about things. To say, I'm going to do all these magical things, they're going to be fabulous, we're going to solve world peace, and here's what's going to prevent you from getting there. And then you take those objectives or those obstacles and you take them out to your colleagues and you say, here's what I'm wrestling with, what are your thoughts? Can you help me? And 9 out of 10 of those, someone has an idea about how they can help you move that rock out of your path. And so being very transparent about what those are with each other allows that vulnerability. Says we're not perfect, no one has all the answers, and at the same time, collectively, we as an organization, we as a company have the answers together. It's not just the CEO's vision or the senior leadership vision, it's all of ours together that we deliver on that. And then the leaders hold you accountable for that. So before you meet with somebody, you go online, you pull their V2 MOM, and you know exactly what they're going after. You know how you can help them or how they might be able to help you. And so it's, again, radical transparency into how we're running the company.
So we're speaking a lot about transparency. I wonder if for those of you who do have international offices, is there similar expectation of transparency across locations, across geographies? Can I expect the same sort of transparency among my British employees as my Turkish employees, as my Chinese employees, my American employees? Do you think about kind of sort of cultural modifiers on that, or is there an expectation that this is the culture, you're buying into the culture?
Definitely some nuances. I'll tell you a story. This happened about 3 years ago. We were still using performance ratings. And instead of a numerical scale, we had words that described it. And the top rating was all over it. And the next rating down was got it, and then getting it, and then not getting it. Okay, so for native English speakers, pretty accessible, a little esoteric, but fine. I get a call from my colleague in France, and it was our normal one-on-one, and he said to me, David, comment dit-on all over it en français? He literally is like, are we painting something? Is it being covered? Like, what do these words mean? And we completely failed to make cultural resonance with our performance rating scale. Just lost it. And we were a global company then, and pretty pedigreed at what we were doing. And so I think the takeaway there is to never lose sight of the fact that globalization is an ongoing thing, and it evolves frequently. Certainly the basics of sending out questions in advance, especially to our colleagues in Japan. They want to think about it before they're going to respond at a meeting. They have less of a sort of on-the-spot engagement approach sometimes. So just being sort of those standard sensitivities, I think, go into play, but also the basic stuff about will this translate into foreign languages, or is it a complete idiom, which all over it was and no longer is part of our rating scale.
So let's talk a little bit about what might potentially be a complete lack of engagement. So I think we probably all saw recent articles or letters, open letters from Yelp employee, from Amazon employee, and I'm curious: is this a lack of engagement? Is this a significant of? It is probably time for a glass of wine at this point. Is it significant of a change in our society? Is this about hiring screening? What do we think this is about? And I'm not going to pick on anybody in particular. I just want you guys to kind of sound out. What did you make of that? And does this relate to engagement itself?
So I don't think we have the right to judge.
There's a lot of great people at Yelp.
Well, so what I would say is there's what the employee thought, there's what the company thought, and then something happened in between. Right, so I feel pretty strongly we really have no right to judge, and so when we think about the letters or the article on Amazon culture, it's a window, but it's one lens, it's one window in a big building. The way I think people operate is no one comes to work to do a crappy job, right? No one comes to work to do bad work. So if you start with that premise, it may change the way you look at feedback or input from someone who's not happy. Certainly in many organizations I've been in, I've had colleagues who are not happy about something. I think that the question is, what is our starting point for hearing that? And if the starting point is, I don't want to hear, just stop, okay? Quit complaining. Enough of this. Then you're automatically going to interpret what's being said in a certain way. I obviously have passions and interests like everyone else, and I have to remind myself too, just stop a second, listen. And in conversation, if I might be having a tough conversation with someone, and I feel like I've just blocked something, I'll stop and I'll actually say, I'm sorry, I need to take a step back because I think I'm stopping you from saying what you need to say. So I'm just gonna zip the lip and listen. So tell me. And I think if we are able to continuously remind ourselves to do things like that, we will have dialogue. Because if it's about monologue, we have a problem. And I think we have work to do to continue to enrich the dialogue. We may not always have the same answers, and we may not always agree. But I think we have an obligation to at least make people feel heard. I certainly want that. And I wouldn't screen people out for that. We screen people for various factors, right? Technical skills. When we think about cultural fit, humility matters a lot to us. Cancer is complicated. If you have arrogance about cancer and you think you know everything, we have a problem. And so we look at cultural factors in that respect. But if it's somebody who's going to be noisy, that's not really what I want to screen out.
So I'd just say that, okay. I was just going to say that a phrase I use a lot is the gap between expectation and reality is where disappointment lives. So the bigger the gap, the greater the disappointment. And the only thing I would add is it's about screening, depending on what size your company is, what's happening there. It's about screening for people that are comfortable with change. It's just about screening for people that are comfortable with ambiguity. It's about, and we live, look, that Yelp letter or Medium post was like super Silicon Valley soapy goodness, right? I mean, I know so many people that talked about that. And then the tweets that followed, they went through her tweets and she was buying expensive bourbon. It's a Silicon Valley soap opera, right? And so I think it's very easy for people to want to kind of get their 5 minutes of fame, that have anger, it's so easy to express your anger at your employer. You can go on Glassdoor, you can write a Medium post, you can do whatever you want to do. But I would say it's about trying to align expectations with reality, and if you're looking for that in the hiring process, for me it's just comfort with change and dealing with ambiguity.
Yeah, I agree with all this stuff. I think that at the end of the day, it's it's about your relationship with your employees and your employees' relationship with the company. And it's never going to be perfect. I think aiming for, maybe some people's are, but I don't try to aim for perfection, but I do try to aim from a place where we all have the same intentions. I really care about investing in our people. I want our people to feel like they're investing in the company, and that's a mutual respect thing. And when that stops happening, I think is when the things break down, right? And so a funny example that we do is I'm not going to say the Zappos model. Is it Netflix who pays people to leave? Is that the one? Not Zappos. Zappos does. Yeah. We didn't fully adopt it. At the same time, I've slowly started doing it a few times. When someone's not really working out, we kind of have this honest conversation. I'm listen, there's a few things we could do. You can go on a PIP, and we can go through that process. You can just keep doing what you're doing, and then secretly go sneak out for job interviews, and we'll kind of know and not say anything, which happens a lot, right? Or we can just both be really honest about it and say, we had a great run, or maybe it wasn't that great, but we had a run, and we're near the end, and so let me give you some severance package, and you go and leave with dignity, and we're just go and be successful somewhere else, and I'll be really happy for you for that. And I felt that has really shaped a lot of how we're thinking about a lot of this. Is I think there's some employees who might not be happy at certain companies, and that doesn't mean that it's a bad company. It doesn't mean that it's a bad employee. It just wasn't the right fit. And I think recognizing that and being really honest about it is really helpful. And it starts in the hiring process, because you've got to ask people what are you here for? And if you want the glory and the fame, there's a lot of companies that are going to do that. As much as I think HR software is awesome, I'm not sure the whole world thinks that. So you don't come to Greenhouse because you want this company that's in the news all the time. We don't do free lunches. If you want free lunches, this isn't it. But if you want to come do amazing work with great people, this is a really good place for you. And if we have that conversation up front and we have it throughout your time period, hopefully we can avoid those scenarios.
So let's talk a little bit about how far engagement extends. I'm not sure the extent to which the folks on the panel use contractors or contingent workers as part of the team. To what extent do you think about contractors and contingent workers and the engagement thereof versus of full W-2 employees? Is it different? Do you measure? Do you think about different programs?
There's a concept that is gaining some traction in the dialogue, and maybe some of you all are involved with it as well. The gig economy is not just Uber and Instacart. 5 years from now, the gig economy will be many of us, if not all of us. That this idea of radical employability, that we will flow into and out of organizations organically, that the idea of employment is shifting and will be very different 5 years from now. And so the idea of a contractor is different than an FTE, I think is already somewhat antiquated thinking insofar as engagement, because even at Salesforce, we rely very heavily on contractors and temporary folks to help us. We consider them part of our ohana, part of our family. They're part of our community and our ecosystem. And so engaging them is just as important. We want them to do great work for us. They might go somewhere else and do something for a little while, and they come back and work with us. And so that idea of the flow of talent, I think, has shifted the dialogue. We do get into some discussions about, well, we're having a team meeting, and do the contractors get to join? And well, can they hear this but not that? And how do you manage that? And I think it's just a dialogue. There's not a black and white answer. Where there is great clarity is the fact that that's shifting and evolving, and it's calling all of us in leadership positions and even in individual contributor roles to evolve with that.
Any other thoughts on the panel? So on a final note, I'm wondering if each of you can give your thoughts as to, do you have any final thoughts? Obviously, we've got a great audience today who came here understanding how can we manage engagement in our own orgs. Any final thoughts on ways to think about and boost engagement in their own orgs? I'm gonna make this one open. Natasha, you look like you have something to say.
Yeah, so I've got a couple of thoughts that I'd love to leave you with. First, don't boil the ocean. It is so tempting to try and solve everything because we want people to be engaged. We want people to feel motivated and committed and like they're part of something bigger than themselves. But it can be overly tempting to try and resolve a lot of challenges. And so my best advice would be to pace yourself, right? Take a moment to set a course and stay on course. Because we won't be successful if we try to boil the ocean, right? Then we do a lot of things, but not so well. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we recognize, we don't talk about it often enough, but we recognize in the Valley, we have an issue with diversity. And I recognize as a minority woman, this is loaded coming from me. But when it comes to diversity and engagement, some of us are in organizations where we are too small to measure how certain minority groups may be actually feeling in the organization. And it is incumbent upon us to take ownership of that and get out there and talk to people. Find out what's going on. No tool in this world, no system is going to solve that. It is incumbent upon us, we have an obligation, being in this function, to talk to people and find out what's happening. Talk to people around. Find out what's happening. Sit in their areas. You don't have to sit at your desk. We're open plan, but that doesn't mean we have to sit where we sit, right? Move around. So I would say just don't stop getting out there. Find out what's happening and make sure you understand when people are leaving, why are they leaving? When people are joining, why are they joining? So it goes beyond any survey tool that you're going to do, but we have a special obligation, especially in this moment when it comes to diverse colleagues.
Thank you. So with that, we're going to wrap up the formal part of the panel tonight. So we're going to get to your questions in one moment. But in the meantime, please join me in thanking our panelists. This was a great discussion. So the ways that it'll work, we're going to have two microphones passing, going around the crowd right now. And I'm going to ask you to wait for the microphones. We are taping it, and you might be heard in this room. You're not going to be heard on film if you don't have the mic. So please raise your hands. We got Phil in the blue shirt, and then Safia in the green shirt. Ready, willing to take your questions.
How do you manage engagement when your company is going through a major executive management change, such as a change in CEOs or COOs? How do you still keep the rest of the company engaged?
So I think what you're asking too is how do you keep a company engaged when might be questions about the direction of the company or directions of leadership. So I think that's really, really hard. I don't have an answer for you, no. Good luck to you. No, I think it's really, really hard, and I think that if there's someone who is a senior leader or someone that is a cultural icon that has social capital in the company, for that person to kind of maybe step up in that time to be either a voice for the employees or kind of a bridge in some way. I think that can be helpful. I think this is where transparency becomes more and more and more important, right? In the absence of information, you fill in the worst case scenario. So just being clear, what are you looking for? Why is it swapping out, right? And there's sometimes you can only say so much, but I would say look for people with social capital that have the trust of the employees, look how to leverage them within the organization, and really be uncomfortably transparent.
So I would add that you could treat this the way one might treat a merger and acquisition, like riffs, right? So if you don't have the answers, to say, we don't have the answers. But give people a forum to hear and talk and have some conversation about it. The other thing I would say is to think about what's unspoken. When people are shifting, there is also a survivor scenario, right? So for the people who remain, or the people who may have been particularly affiliated with an executive who's leaving, kind of special attention can be paid to those folks.
Hi there, Lois Bukowski with Zendesk. Udemy, thanks for another great event. Panelists, you're awesome. I would love to hear you talk about the role of the line manager in engagement and give us something that we don't know.
What don't you know? So we just ran our second like big engagement survey, and I'm an engineer and ex-derivatives trader, so I just all I do is want to go plot everything and look at the data. And the first thing I looked at, I was really curious, now that we're bigger, there's we don't really have company trends anymore, so I wanted to understand what's the first variable. So if we're going to put people into groups, what's the biggest spread? Guess what it was? Manager. And my instinct was first department, right? I thought oh, people's experiences in different departments might actually be the thing that's the most impactful, but it was actually manager to a pretty massive spread. I'd say 30-point spread on engagement score based on managers. And not just one data point, right? So I think you read them all, you read it all the time, but yeah, manager really impacts engagement score. So I don't know, what do you do? Tell them that, show the data. So what we actually did was show people, not show the names, we showed it and said, so there's two things you should take away from this. One is, be a little intimidated. You have a whole lot of power over a lot of really special people. And be really empowered. That's really cool. Let's figure out what it is that helps you do it and take on that ownership. And that's been a big shift we've done this quarter now, is worked with our line managers to just show them the data and say, you can really impact a few people's lives.
One of my pet peeves, and we see them a lot, are these articles about how to manage millennials. The 9 topic. Thank you, Business Insider. I didn't know how to do this. No, seriously, thank you, Business Insider. Great stuff. Keep it going. That we talk to the line managers and we say, here are the 9 bullet points for how you're going to manage this group of people. Now, anybody who is a millennial or in any demographic group is probably going to tell you, I don't like being managed like my demographic groups like being managed. I'm a human being, as are we all. And so as the line managers are coming along their journey of being people leaders, I think it's just important to go back to what is just binary in our human nature of the power of connection. Are we teaching our leaders and our managers how to connect with people at its most basic and simple format? Get rid of all the technology, get rid of all the apps and the tweets and everything else, and are we really talking about how do you make a meaningful relationship with an individual? And toss all of those how to manage this generation things out the window, because it paints people with a broad brush that gets us into all kinds of nasty things that we're all working very hard in our industry to get our organizations mindful of. So.
The only other thing I will add, and maybe you know this, maybe you don't, is that most managers think they're great managers. Most employees haven't had great managers, so do the math on that one. So I would say helping your managers drive for self-awareness for all of these other reasons, but I truly believe self-awareness is the key to everything.
Hi panel, I'm Tiffany. I've got a question about, sometimes you accidentally hire someone even though you've got all these great pieces at play to make sure that you don't hire the bad people. Sometimes you get those little cancerous cells that sit in the corner and just they're really toxic for the environment. What are the things that you do to measure whether or not you've already hired someone who is toxic so that you can cut the cord quickly? I think all of us have a lot of principles at play to hire well, but firing well is something that we don't talk about a lot. How do you guys fire well?
I think one of the best pieces of advice that I can give when it comes to how we exit people from an organization, it's kind of wacky advice, but be exited yourself. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but if you think about your own career, if any of you have lost your jobs for whatever reason, wrong fit, acquisition, riff, whatever, but if any of you have ever lost your job, think about how you were treated. Did it land well? Did it not land well? Were you treated with respect or not treated with respect? Did the company think they were treating you with respect, but it really didn't land that way with you? That's what I would recommend. Think about that experience and what you'd want yourself. And if you think about it in that respect, and put yourself in the other person's shoes now, thinking about the unfortunate circumstance of having to let somebody go, to apply that same approach to that person. Whether they're incredibly toxic and just hard to be around, or whether they just weren't performing at the right level, or just maybe the work went away, so the role's going away. But it really is about how would you want to be treated? And so we have to be very careful, even with our managers. So you had a great story. I really appreciated you sharing that. Sometimes managers can be flip about letting somebody, we need to get rid of them. Cut the cord, get rid of them. You know, they do this kind of action.
By the time they come to talk to us, it's been going on for 3 or 4 months. They're using words like toxic and cancer before, like it's way far gone.
Absolutely. But it is a human being who has responsibilities, and we have to treat people with that level of dignity.
We have a checklist. It's got 2 things on it. Are they leaving with dignity? And they can't be surprised. If you've never told them their job's on the line, you're not allowed to fire them. Like, that's not cool. That's not fair. You know, so that's like our checklist internally. I mean, there is more, but I'd say like on a high level, if someone comes to me and says something like that, I'm like, do they know? Have you told them? Have you given them a chance to get better?
Hi, Amy Sullivan from Frog. So I'm in grad school for IO right now, and we're learning all the science behind, you know, for engagement we need autonomy, experience, meaningfulness, and such. But you guys have been mostly focusing on personal relationships. So I was wondering, is there like a sweet spot between personal and like the way that the job is described and presented and informed? Or is that kind of just like consistent in your organization, so now you're just focusing on personal with the manager?
Engagement is so many things. Like, it's also all those things. So that's my answer, is it's all the things.
I think also most of us are at small companies, right? And so I think that there is a lens that we're looking through that is very specific to relationships in small companies, right? If you have 20,000 employees, you still want to have a relationship with your manager, but I think you're also hearing that from companies that have grown from 50 to 500 people in a very short period of time.
Even still at 20,000 people, the number of folks that we have come to us after they've started a job, let's say they got the offer, 4 or 6 weeks ago, they come and they say, this isn't what I thought I signed up for. We move at such a pace in this town, in this valley, in this industry, and even in business today, that the jobs and the needs shift on a dime. And so how are we creating resilient learning organizations that welcome people in who are hiring for agility and that fungibility of skill? And at the same time, remembering that that person probably left a job or just graduated from grad school, starting their first job with an expectation set. And when that expectation is unmanaged or unmet, we have this gap. And so remembering that there's a human being inside of that with some possibly unarticulated expectations that might be there. And if the job has pivoted or the company's pivoted, we have to be really explicit about that. Call it out and make sure we're hearing truly the emotion that's coming out of there so that we can dialogue on it and make sure that that person's going to be okay. Or if it's the case of it's a wrong fit, help them move on to their next thing and do that quickly for their own sake, if not for the organization's.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I work at Quantcast. And this question is for all of you, but specifically Natasha, you had mentioned that one of the things you guys try to do is make managers feel like they're empowered to have the right kind of conversations with their employees. And so I'm wondering how you make people feel like they are empowered to have those kinds of conversations, and how do you know that they are feeling empowered to do that?
One of the most powerful things that I think my colleague Casey and I do is we actually role play. So we'll say to a manager, we'll be having a conversation about something that they need to do, and we'll talk through some of the things that, okay, so if we break it down, here maybe, what are the kinds of things that you want to cover? What are the core messages? And then we actually role play it. In fact, Lauren, we did this with a manager just yesterday, or 2 days ago, where we actually said to the manager, okay, so how would you say that to me? And so he said what he said, and then we turned to Lauren and said, how did that land? So you were observing, did that resonate? So actually practicing makes a huge difference. And when it's a really tough conversation, I'll often tell the manager, practice it on the car on the way to work. Practice it while you're brushing your teeth. And imagine the worst case scenario, because it's going to be better than that, right? Because you're going to imagine, Godzilla comes through. It's not going to be like that. I really believe in the power of practice. and finding the right words, finding the language, and ooh, I didn't like the way that sounded, I'm not gonna say that, or I gotta write that one down, that was really good. And so practicing, when you think about the way adults learn, some of us do learn by reading or from hearing, but many of us learn especially well from practice, from actually taking action and doing. And so I found that to be the most effective way to help a manager prepare for something like that.
And I think we have time for 2 more minutes, or 2 more questions.
Hi, I'm Cynthia from Comcast. I've heard everyone here talk about transparency in their organization. So when your organization has gone from just the organic overhearing what's going on and having that pulse on it to the size where you're in multiple offices or around the world, what communication tools are you using, whether that is in broader formal communications, corporate communications, or just day-to-day communication between employees?
We've heard good things about a tool called Slack.
Yes, that. So I kind of went down this rabbit hole with our team a couple months ago when we were getting into this conversation. And I was like, let's just draw the different, what are the different groups and what are the ways we could talk to each other? And it looked like a scene out of The Beautiful Mind when we left the room. We made so many arrows between executive team, directors, people managers, individual contributors, and then what are all the ways that everyone wants to talk to each other, and then each method of how it happens. And what we landed on was there's a ton of things you should do. And how big is Quantcast? Is a couple thousand? Okay. So you could probably still draw this same chart. I would actually encourage people to do it. It was really eye-opening for us because you realize you can't do everything, but you say, okay, if the main things we want to do are figure out how to bubble information up from employees to the most senior of leadership, that's a really important one we should figure out. If we also want to figure out how we can have departments talk to each other, that's another one. If we want to help managers and individual contributors, that's a great one. And maybe the senior managers with the leadership team, that feels like a really good one. And pick the most important ones and then pick a couple of ways to do it. So what we've landed on is we just prioritize. So we're okay, all hands are a really good way to talk to everyone. Then we created the culture committee, which has one representative from each department. That's an individual contributor, and that's another method of two-way communication. And we have a whole bunch of these. So it's a bit systematic, but I actually think it made it pretty all-encompassing to not make it perfect, but at least get the big ones that were most important for us.
So I've had the pleasure of working in small organizations and very large organizations, over 100,000 people. And the power is with that first-line manager. So the ability to tap into that individual and make sure that they have information that they can share, that has been key, no matter which kind of company I've been in. The other thing I would say is figuring out the right cadence. It differs, right? So you've got to really inquire and find out the frequency of communication. Some leaders want to do a weekly stand-up, and some leaders, a monthly is fine, thank you. And so it's finding the pace, I think, is important. And I'm sure you experience that at Salesforce as well, because you've got many modes of communication, yes?
Yeah, we do. One of the things that our data science team is looking into right now is around just natural language processing and some of the AI that we can deploy in forums where employees know that their comments are attributable, so they're signing things or it's under their profile, or even non-attributable from survey feedback where we know their demographic information depending on where they are in the organization, and how can we draw insights from those. One of the key things that, even though we're using some really forward-leaning technology that makes my head hurt when they tell me about it, is what are we going to do about it? And that's always the number one guiding principle. It's great that we have all these insights, but if we're not going to act on it, then let's not even ask the question. And I think that's the most important thing, regardless of size.
Well, thank you very much from me, from Udemy. Thank you very much for the really radical transparency. So I appreciate, I know it's a theme for today, but thank you for exemplifying that. And please join me in thanking our panel for two housekeeping items. Number one, we did include surveys. Please fill them out. As I said before, we take these events really seriously, and we'd love to know what you thought and how we can improve. The second is, obviously, this is an HR-focused event, so as such, the bar is open. feel free to join us for another hour and a half. We're going to be pouring beer and wine. So we'd love to continue this conversation in small groups, and feel free also to mob the stage. Thank you again.